Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Barry and Louise Berman Double Homicide. Now, in my research of this particular double homicide that occurred out in the desert of Death Valley, off Highway 395 and north of CIA Military Intelligence China Lake, near the town of Independence. You should know that my research reveals that enormous amounts of background information on the players involved has been scrubbed, undoubtedly deliberately on purpose. So I have to apologize up front for doing the best I can. There's just, as you know, in my videos, I attempt to set the table before we sit down for dinner, and to do that, I always prefer to go backwards in time to see where these people came from, because my experience is if it has to do with the military intelligence clandestine services, these people generally do not come from under a rock. In other words, they're chosen and selected for duty. They may not even be aware of it. You know, they could be conscripted, right? With opportunities and housing deals and record contracts, etc. Well, anyway, the story of Barry Berman, who graduated from Beverly Hills High School, does, of course, play into most of the themes of my other videos that focus on Benedict Canyon, Coldwater Canyon, Franklin Canyon, Laurel Canyon. So, of course, what I first did was on Barry, I wanted to go backwards to his parents. And his parents are Jules and Ruth Berman, spelled B-E-R-M-A-N. And you'll be not surprised to learn that most of the information on Jules Berman has been disappeared, deleted. Jules Berman was born, they didn't even have a birthday, but 1911, sometime in 1911, he was born. He lived until age 87. He passed away on July 18th, 1998, residing in Beverly Hills. I can't get a resident address on him. I believe he lived off Coldwater Canyon in close proximity to where William Randolph Hearst lived, in the home that was originally purchased by a Jewish banker and architected by a Jewish architect, not far from where I believe Jules Berman had a lovely home. Not on Coldwater Canyon, but off a tributary of it. All right, so anyway, I wish I could tell you about Jules Berman and his parents, but there's no information available on him. The story picks up in 1962, but you sort of have to use your imagination to see what came first, right? Jules Berman, according to Wikipedia, no birth date, was a liquor importer in Southern California, and then later a real estate developer, and then also a collector of art from pre-Columbia Central and South America. He was awarded a franchise to import the Mexican Kahlua coffee-flavored liqueur in 1962, earning Jules Berman the nickname of Mr. Kahlua. I remember my brother enjoyed Kahlua and cream. All right, so as I have a lot of questions, right, and I don't have a lot of answers, but presumably his son, no birth date, was born in 1950. This is Barry Berman, and he rejected the wealthy lifestyle that his parents, Ruth and Jules, lived in Beverly Hills. Yet, you'll notice that he did attend Beverly Hills High School and that he did live in their beautiful home until he went off to college, where he went to Cal Polytech, Cal State San Luis Obispo, because he thought he might be going into farming, which I find highly unusual that anyone from Beverly Hills would think about going into a hardworking job like farming and agriculture. But anyway, that's where he went up to do some education in agriculture. And then later he abandoned that idea, of course. Anyway, it certainly did introduce him to the Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County areas, which, if you don't know, have military intelligence history, long history of military intelligence. In other words, going back to the Spanish, colonialism. And I'm not surprised that Jules Berman collected pre-Columbian art from Mexico because he obviously had an affinity for the colonialization of the New World, right? I mean, that's what that is. That's the native people being turned over by the Spanish. Now, you know, the United States of America, which isn't united nor is it 50 states, it's 12 banking districts. We're a colonial hodgepodge as well. We were colonized by the Spanish on the west, the French to the south, and the English to the north, plus other people from continental Europe that came to the United States. But primarily it was the French, the Irish, the English, and the Spanish. That's who booted out the Native American peoples. The people that were indigenous, the people that were living here first. They got the short end of the straw on that. They didn't understand what land trusts were. They didn't hear that term before. So, paradoxically, in 1962, Jules Berman is awarded a liquor franchise to import Mexican liqueur brand name Kahlua. Now, this has some similarities to Abigail Folger's parents, Inés Mejia, whose parents were ambassadors to El Salvador and lived on her land trust off El Salvador, undoubtedly with rent and payments coming from military tenants. And her father, Peter Folger, whose grandfather founded Folger's Coffee Company in San Francisco, which put them squarely in the importation business. Well, that's the business that Jules Berman is, in importation business. That's code for drug importation, people. It doesn't matter if it's coffee beans or Kahlua liqueur. It doesn't make any difference. You can put drugs on the shipments, or rifles, or ammo, or whatever, right? That's why we have the Port of Long Beach. That's why all port facilities are military intelligence controlled, because you can import and export weapons, human trafficking, and drugs. In other words, things that are normally considered illegal can be moved through a port facility controlled by the invisible hand of military intelligence. Anyway, Jules Berman was in the importation business, so I'm going to say that he had affiliations with the clandestine military people. Obviously, not going to import coffee or Kahlua unless you have thumbs up. So I'm going to say that Barry, was in 1964, he would have gone off to high school at Beverly Hills High School. I don't know where he went to elementary school. They don't tell me. But supposedly he lived in Beverly Hills. He attended Beverly Hills High School, which is off Santa Monica Boulevard. It's near the southern end of the Los Angeles Golf Course Country Club. And it's only one block from where Century City is. And the Century Plaza Hotel and the Century Towers office buildings is one block away from Beverly Hills High School 90210. And this is where Barry Berman attended high school. And he would have attended that high school 1964 through 1968, whereupon he would have then attended Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, Cal State. All right? So, anyway, during the time that Barry Berman is attending Beverly Hills High School, his father mysteriously enters the real estate development business, even though supposedly he's very successful as an importer of liquor. But he decides to get into the real estate business, so he forms a partnership with two men, William Newell, spelled Newell, William Newell, and Joe D. Brown. They formed the Lake Arrowhead Development Company sometime around 1960. So this is before Barry went off to high school. This is interesting because it's 2 years before he gets his Kahlua franchise, and he's in the real estate business. So they acquire 3,200 acres of land in Lake Arrowhead, California, and Lake Arrowhead Village. They purchase it from the Los Angeles Turf Club for $6.5 million. So some bank must have financed this. They then went ahead and built an 18-hole golf course. They subdivided the property into 18 residential housing tracts. And in 1968, in order to finance further development in the area, Lake Arrowhead Development Company merged with Boise Cascade Corporation, which paid them $18 million. So again, they paid $6.5 million, and then they sold their interest for more than 2.5 times what they invested. However, simultaneously and before that transaction with Boise Cascade, in 1964, Jules Berman, the father of Barry, purchased the land which is now known as the Runyon Canyon Park, which is right above the Magic Castle, in close proximity to where Janis Joplin was murdered and done away with, and where Lindsay Pearlman was murdered last year. In January 2022, Lindsay Pearlman was murdered outside the gate of the Runyon Canyon Park. Well, anyway, this is 1964. The Jules Berman purchased this parcel. He bought it from Huntington Hartford, who's a land scion, comes from a super rich family in New York. Huntington Hartford also developed Rustic Canyon in Pacific Palisades, which includes the property where the Will Rogers Hunting Lodge is located and where Charlie Miles Maddox Manson lived for about a year on Huntington Hartford property that CBS Columbia Records controlled the lease on that property. But it was owned by Huntington Hartford, who did business with Jules Berman, who bought the Runyon Canyon Park. He immediately tore down a mansion that was on the property that had been built by a Hollywood singer, John McCormack, because he didn't want to pay property taxes on the property. I don't know why. He just bought all this land with money. I don't know where it came from. What's the big deal on some property taxes on a historic mansion that had the name of a patron saint, San Patrizio? Anyway, he tore it down. So that guy gave some hate mail to Jules Berman. All right. So in 1964, he buys Runyon Canyon. In 1965, the next year, they're full on to get the permitting to expand the the land that's known as Lake Arrowhead, which is private. Public people cannot go to Lake Arrowhead. You have to have permission from an owner. In 1965, they don't waste any time. They go out and buy 3,600 acres of land in Santa Barbara County, known as El Capitan Ranch, on the Gaviota Coast, aka Goleta. This is just below the Ronald Reagan Ranch. The Ronald Reagan Ranch, also known as Camino del Cielo, Reagan Ranch known as Rancho del Cielo, is 688 acres, and it sits atop what is the Santa Ynez Mountains, and it's part of the Los Padres National Forest. The Ronald Reagan Ranch, aka Rancho del Cielo, is 688 acres. I've been on the perimeter of that property from 2 different directions. It's accessible from 4 roads, one of which is a dirt road and not open for automobile traffic. So then it's open on 3 roads, which are mostly paved, however, are quite rough in parts, and in parts are dirt roads, dirt gravel roads. However, some of the roads have some magnificent military constructed bridges, which are off the chart. That the county of Santa Barbara did not build those bridges, okay? It's more like Bechtel or Brown and Root built those bridges. Those are serious bridges. There are 16 of them on North Refugio Road. 16 bridges that I would estimate the cost at a minimum of $6 million per bridge, and there's 16 of them. Anyway, there's also there's South Refugio Road, which goes from Highway 101, the Ventura Highway, up to the Reagan Ranch. It's a very difficult, rough road. Crosses several bridges, and there's creeks that run in the winter. There's also, you go to Solvang or Santa Ynez, the little town of Santa Ynez, which is like a 3-block town. It's adjacent to Solvang. Anyway, that's called North Refugio Road. You can enter the Ronald Reagan Ranch from that direction, or you can enter from the San Marcos Pass grade on a road that's called West Camino Cielo. It also goes by route Fire Road number 12. It's kind of confusing. There's potholes on that road. I've been on West Camino Cielo. Anyway, it's actually 3,638 acres of land that was purchased by Barry Berman and his partners of the Lake Arrowhead Development Company. It's a spectacular property. It looks right out of the coast. Now, I guess it won't come as a big surprise to you. They did that in 1965, and then in 1968, just about 2.5 years after they closed that deal, Exxon Mobil is interested in the property, right? Because there's absolutely no reason to buy raw land unless you have a way to make money, right? So either the clandestine service loan you the money and you can be the fake owner, or, which I believe is probably the most likely scenario, and or you have a tenant that will pay you gobs of rent. And I think it's a combination of both. I think it's the oil industry, which is very important in the military industrial complex, needed to put a processing center in on that property. So they did. They started talking about that in 1968, and I'm sure they signed an agreement letter. They also simultaneously built oil extracting platforms 5 to 6 miles off the shore of Santa Barbara and Goleta, and where the University of California, Santa Barbara is located, which is really called Ileton. I always love it when the UC campuses are in cities different than advertised. Like University of San Diego, UC San Diego is actually in La Jolla or Torrey Pines. And University of California, Santa Barbara is in Ileton, Goleta. But because that doesn't sound as sexy as Montecito or Santa Barbara, they call it Santa Barbara. Anyway, it's kind of disturbing to have oil platforms, oil drilling platforms so close to the shore. And sure enough, in 1970, there was a huge oil spill that happened, and this caused a huge ruckus, right? But Exxon built a facility to process the oil off those platforms up on the hill away from Highway 101 where nosy tourists could look. And it's on this property that's controlled by Jules Berman. All right? So even though his son, Barry Berman, rejected his father's real estate development and ethics, he nevertheless decided to live on the property himself, undoubtedly in rent-free property. And so he did. So he moved in there after he dropped out of Cal State San Luis Obispo Polytech. You should know that Jules Berman was personal friends with Edmund G. Brown, Pat Brown, Jerry Brown's Moonbeam's father. And Pat Brown named Jules Berman the California State Athletic Commissioner in 1965, right when they were doing this deal to buy all the Santa Barbara County 3,600 acres of land, which is right below the Ronald Reagan Rancho de Cielo property and is 5 times larger than the Ronald Reagan Ranch. You know, the Ronald Reagan Ranch is owned by the CIA, right? It's owned by the the Young Republicans, aka Young America Foundation. Young America Foundation, which is a combination of Young Republicans, and Young American is a conservative group for young boys and young people. And they're out of Reston, Virginia. 11480 Commerce Park Drive, 6th floor, Reston, Virginia. They own 688 acres of what was the Ronald Reagan Ranch. It's owned by the CIA in Reston, Virginia. So what do you think the chances are that the CIA is going to be, surrounded by Jules Berman unless they're part of the program, right? They own the whole hillside, okay? They own all those Santa Ynez Mountains. And they're part of the Los Padres National Forest, which means they own the forest too, which is a ginormous amount of real estate. And it's all military intelligence controlled. I can assure you that Barry Berman and his father did not control this property, okay? Which is being used by Exxon Mobil Corporation. All right, anyway, I know I'm meandering a little bit here, but the story of Barry Berman is absent, a lot of details. But anyway, he moves back onto his father's property, even though he doesn't agree with his father. But he lives basically in El Capitan, and he starts a iron forging company. And he also travels to India because he gets into transcendental meditation or some form of East Indian guru training, where he upon meets a guru, of course, right? What CI story is complete without an Indian guru like the Maharishi, right? Well, we have one of those in the Barry Berman story. And what do you know? The guru actually relocates to University of California, Santa Barbara, in Goleta, where he holds truth sessions. And Barry Berman attends the truth sessions in Santa Barbara whilst he's living on his father's property, which is very close proximity. It's just, within 8 miles away. He could just easily drive in from the beach, or I believe he was living in El Capitan Canyon. There are 3 canyons. There's El Capitan Canyon, there's Los Flores Canyon, and then there's Refugio Road Canyon. Those are the 3 canyons that have paved roads. There's probably other canyons, but those are the 3 that have paved roads. And cattle guards, and bridges over creeks, dry creeks. They're wet in the winter and dry every time in all the other seasons. 3 out of 4 seasons, they're dry creeks. So, arroyo secos. So what I'm trying to tell you is that at the truth sessions with the guru, Barry meets an older woman. She's 16 years older than him. And her name is Louise. Well, it's Louise. You could pick. She has 3 ex-husbands, all right? So so she's got a maiden name and 3 ex-husbands. So she has 4 names. And I don't know any of them. But anyway, Louise, who's 16 years older than Barry, they meet in 1980. And at the guru session, and she makes it real clear that she's living with her teenage daughter, whose name is Laura, in Goleta, in a little apartment. And Laura is 17 years old, and at this time, Louise is 46 years old. I'm going to call her the name of her daughter, Laura. Her daughter Laura's name is Westerman. Laura Westerman. So at one point, Louise was Louise Westerman when her husband was Wes Westerland. She had 2 sons and a daughter from 3 different husbands. So I'm not saying that the sons belonged to Wes. I think her eldest son belonged to some other of her first marriage, and I believe Wes Westerman was her 3rd marriage, and Barry Berman was the 4th marriage. So she gets around. She also lived in Box Canyon, Chatworth, which, if you don't know, that's part of the Spawn Ranch, essentially. And she's the same age as Charlie Miles Maddox Manson. In other words, Louise Westerman, or Louise Berman, is the same age as Charlie Manson. And Charlie Manson spent a little bit of time in Box Canyon in 1969. And so did Laura Westerman. So I find it a coincidence that Charlie Manson is in a CIA-controlled area known as the Spawn Ranch, Canoga Park, and Box Canyon, and so is Laura Westerman's mother, Louise. And she's taking drugs, and she's in with a group of hippies. And you know that the CIA created the hippies, and Charlie Manson was never a hippie. He always had a crew cut, and he was had short hair because he was in federal prison for crimes that he didn't really commit. But you have to have short hair when you're in prison. It was only when they released him they had him grow his hair out, so that he could be construed as a hippie, even though he wasn't a hippie. You see? Don't forget that the whole beatnik movement was a clandestine military thing. The whole hippie movement and the yippie movement and Allen Ginsberg and all of these fake hippies, including Timothy Leary, they all came from military intelligence. So the whole hippie union, that's what Sharon Tate's father would dress up as. Sunglasses, long hair. He didn't wear his United States Army uniform as a colonel. He wore hippie clothes because he was infiltrated in the hippies. And so was Louise Westerman. When she's the same age as Charlie Miles Maddox in 1969, Charlie was 34 years old. And so was Louise Westerman. She was 34 years old when she's in Box Canyon. Same age as Charlie Manson. Anyway, so she ends up with her daughter in Santa Barbara in Goleta, and she, at the yoga guru meets Barry and gloms right onto him. He invites her to live in one of the 3 cottages on the property that his father owns. So she moves in as a roommate, but it's very quick. They end up in bed together, and they decide to get married. And then the father, Jules, is so pleased that his son, his wayward son, aged 30 years old, is getting married. So he buys, I guess he can afford this. So Jules Berman buys 214 acres of land adjacent to the Ronald Reagan Ranch. And I'm going to say that this property is called, has a name, it's a ranch unto itself, on Refugio Road. And it's called the Rancho La Sherpa. Rancho La Sherpa Ranch. It has a swimming pool. It's the only ranch that has a swimming pool on this mountainside. And this is where Barry, newlyweds with 4-time married Louise Westerman, make their home. Now, this is very remote, and it's very difficult to get off that mountain because of the bumpy road, the steepness, the brakes and tires you're going to go through. And apparently Mike Love of the Beach Boys visited them, and he stupidly drove his Rolls Royce up Refugio Road. You should never do that. You should have a 4-wheel drive car. Anyway, and apparently Mike Love's Rolls Royce required repairs, and the engine caught on fire by the time he arrived at Barry Berman's Rancho La Sherpa, which is adjacent to the front gate for the Ronald Reagan Ranch, which is about a half a mile to the west of Barry Berman. Barry Berman. Don't you see, people? There is no way. Ronald Reagan is the president of the United States in 1981, right? And that's when Barry Berman is living on the property, property that's consigned to Ronald Reagan. So the Secret Service and the military intelligence would have to approve that transaction if you're going to be next door neighbors with Ronald Reagan, right? Didn't we have Gorbachev come and visit? Because the whole time, Ronald Reagan was president from 1981 until 1989, and so the whole time, Barry Berman is living adjacent to the Ronald Reagan Ranch, a.k.a. Rancho del Cielo. Get it? Anyway, not everything is happy in paradise, because it turns out about 4 or 5 years into this marriage, Barry and Louise are not getting along, and they separate. I don't know who's living where. They have 3 homes on the property, so perhaps one of them could sleep in a different bed. And Barry starts telling friends he's going to sail his father's boat, which is named the Kahlua. It's a really large yacht. He's going to sail it to the South Pacific. So he's talking about exiting stage left, right? And according to Laura goes to visit. Now, this is really peculiar. So Laura, who is age 19 years old, she's going to go see her mother around New Year's in 1983, driving up Refugio Road, and it's raining really badly, and the creek bed is overflowing, and somehow Laura in her Volkswagen, I don't know if it was a Bug or a Carmen Ghia, but she loses control, goes into this creek, and disappears, never to be found again. They never find her body, which I find impossible to believe this story. because that creek is pretty far up. It's at least 3.5 miles up from Highway 101. They should be able to find that body somewhere along that creek bed. Anyway, they never did. So her body goes missing in January 1983. Then 3 years exactly, on January 5th, 1986, to get back together, it's decided that Louise and Barry will go on this exotic camping trip to the Death Valley Monument in a place called Saline Valley. Now, this takes me back to Charlie Miles Maddox Manson, because he was arrested for graffiti for defacing the Death Valley Monument, which I don't believe he did. The Death Valley Monument is 16 miles from where the Saline Valley Hot Springs is located, and that's where these two were camping. And there was a United States Marine Corps captain who was there at the time, and he was interested in threesomes, allegedly, and he went on a hike with these two, and their bodies, they went missing for 3 years. Their bodies eventually were discovered 2 years and 10.5 months later. And the prime suspect was this United States Marine captain who goes by the name of Michael Joseph Pepe, who was stationed at a United States Army facility, about 60 miles to the east of this hot springs. But this is allegedly where Charlie Manson was committed some crime for federal crime for Bureau Land Management for defacing the Death Valley Monument. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. Charlie Manson never did that. And by the way, they never pursued those charges. They charged him with 7 homicides of Sharon Tate and Lena LaBianca, etc. But what I wanted to say about this is that I find it another correlation that this is the area where Charlie Manson was arrested for graffiti, not homicide. And this is the area where Barry and Louise Berman go missing and then are found dead 3 years later. Now, you can't blame this death on Charlie Manson because he's been in state prison this whole time. So this is a murder that has definitely nothing to do with Charlie Miles Maddox because he's in prison. He's in California State Prison, all right? So somebody else did it, and the sheriff thinks that it was Michael Joseph Pepe, who was arrested in Cambodia, Southeast Asia, murdering children in Phnom Penh. And then he's extradited back to the United States, convicted of murdering children in Cambodia, which are probably CIA children, and he's put to federal prison. And then they never did charge Michael Pepe with the Berman murders. But their bodies were found buried on top of each other in a shallow grave 6 miles away from the hot springs where their Datsun pickup truck was parked. Now, it turns out that this captain, Michael Pepe, he had a pickup truck of his own, so he could have transferred their bodies in his pickup truck, then buried them. So it is very plausible that he could have done the murder. It's very plausible. But he was never charged with it. He suspected of it, but never charged in it. Anyway, then Jules Berman, the father, he lives to age 87. And like I said, he dies in 1998, in July 1998. So there was never any resolution of his son's murder. His son was obviously murdered. Their wedding rings were missing, and his son's custom belt buckle that was made by an artist who lived on the property on El Capitan Ranch, that was missing also, and he always wore that. So other than that, there were credit cards left in there were credit cards on them, and they were never used. So it doesn't appear that robbery was the motive. But like I said, the wedding rings were missing and the belt buckle. Other than that, they were clothed when they were found, but it's 3 years in the ground, so they're not. There's no cause of death. Nobody could figure out how they died, but they were in a grave buried on top of each other. So it's pretty clear that they were killed and buried, but we don't know how. Anyway, that's my story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. It's got clandestine military intelligence fingerprints all over it. And it's all on military controlled properties. If you follow Charlie Manson, the only properties he ever lived at were controlled by military intelligence. So that makes Charlie Manson a tool of military intelligence. And I believe that Louise Berman Westerman she's in Box Canyon, that's controlled. She goes disappearing at the hot springs at Saline Valley, that's a controlled area as part of the Greater China Lake Naval Weapons Facility. And there's a United States officer, Marine, present during their disappearance. And so I'm going to call it a clandestine murder, but I don't understand the motive at all. All right, so the key players again are Jules Berman, the father, his wife Ruth, who live in Beverly Hills. Then there's this mysterious Louise, who's been married 4 times, dead at age 52. Barry is dead at age 36. And then there's Laura, who went missing 3 years exactly to the day earlier in 1983. In January 1983, Laura, age 19, goes missing. They find her car on Refugio Road below the Ronald Reagan Ranch, about 3 miles down the hill from the Ronald Reagan Ranch. But there's no Laura. We got a yacht that's called the Kahlua. The cars that Jules drives are Maserati and Rolls Royce. That's what he parks in his garage in Beverly Hills. So this guy's living high on the hog for a guy who just sells and imports Kahlua liqueurs. Talk to you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.